3 days passed, and Yuna's condition grew worse with each one. The fluid in her lung made every breath a battle. The cold had settled into her bones like a permanent guest that refused to leave. Her fingers had turned an ugly shade of gray, and she could no longer feel her smallest toes. But she was still alive, and she could not understand why. The cub had not moved from its spot outside her ship. It sat there in the snow, day and night, watching her through the viewport with those 6 unblinking eyes. Sometimes it would stand and walk in small circles, stretching its legs, but it always returned to the same position. Always watching. Always waiting. Yuna had stopped pointing her weapon at it after the first day. Whatever the creature wanted, it was not her death. If it had wanted to kill her, it would have done so already. The walls of her broken ship would not stop a Velker, even a young one. On the 3rd morning, Yuna realized she had run out of water. She had melted snow in a small container using her emergency heater, but the heater had died during the night, and her last container was empty. She needed to go outside. The thought terrified her. Not because of the cold, though that was deadly enough. Not because of her injuries, though they made every movement agony. She was terrified because going outside meant getting closer to the cub. She told herself it was foolish. The creature had done nothing but watch her for 3 days. It had shown no aggression, no hunting behavior, nothing that suggested it saw her as prey. But deep in her mind, in the part that still remembered what it meant to be prey on a world full of predators, she could not shake the fear. Yuna gathered her courage and her empty containers. She wrapped herself in every piece of clothing she could find, sealed her face behind a breathing mask, and opened the emergency hatch. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Even through her layers of clothing, she could feel it trying to steal the heat from her body. She stumbled out of the ship and immediately fell to her knees, her broken ribs screaming in protest. The cub stood up. Yuna froze, watching the creature through her mask. It was smaller than she had realized from inside the ship, only reaching her chest in height, but it was still large enough to kill her with ease. Its silver blue scales shimmered in the pale light of the distant sun, and its fur rippled in the constant wind. It took a step toward her. Yuna's hand went to her sidearm, but she did not draw it. She could not have moved fast enough anyway. If the cub wanted her dead, she would be dead before her weapon cleared its holster. But the cub stopped after that single step. It tilted its head to the side and made a small sound, almost like a question. Then it sat back down and continued to watch her. Yuna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking as she gathered snow into her containers, working as quickly as her damaged body would allow. The cub watched every movement but made no attempt to approach her again. She was 20 meters from the ship when her body finally gave out. The fall happened slowly, or at least it felt that way. Her legs simply stopped working. Her vision went gray at the edges. She felt herself tipping forward, felt the snow rushing up to meet her face, and then everything went dark. She woke up inside the ship. At first, Yuna thought she was dreaming. She remembered falling in the snow. She remembered the cold seeping into her body, stealing her consciousness. She should have died out there, frozen solid within minutes, but she was inside, wrapped in her emergency blankets. With her containers of snow sitting beside her, she turned her head and saw the cub sitting in the doorway of the hatch. There were marks in the snow outside. Drag marks. They led from the spot where she had fallen all the way to the ship's entrance. And on the cub's silver blue scales, there were dark stains that looked almost like dried blood. Her blood. Yuna's voice came out as a whisper, rough and weak. You dragged me back? The cub watched her with those 6 eyes. It did not move. It did not make a sound. Yuna tried to sit up, but the effort sent her into a coughing fit. The coughs were wet and deep, and she could taste copper on her tongue. Blood. Her lung was getting worse. She coughed and coughed, unable to stop, each spasm sending fresh waves of pain through her chest. The cub stiffened. Yuna saw it through her tears, through the haze of pain and oxygen deprivation. The creature's entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing at once. Its 6 eyes widened, and for a moment, she thought it was preparing to attack. That her weakness had finally triggered its predator instincts. But then it did something she would never forget. The cub walked toward her, slowly, carefully. It was approaching something fragile that might break at any moment. It crossed the small space of the cockpit, stepping over debris and containers, until it stood directly beside her dot, and then it pressed its head against her chest. Not hard, not aggressive, just a gentle pressure, warm scales against her thin blankets, 6 eyes closing as it listened to her heartbeat. It stayed there, unmoving, as her coughing fit slowly subsided. It stayed there as her breathing returned to normal. It stayed there, like it was trying to shield her from the pain with its own body. Yuna's hand moved on its own. She reached up and touched the cub's head, feeling the strange combination of scales and fur beneath her fingertips. The creature did not pull away. It leaned into her touch, pressing harder against her chest, making a low, humming sound that vibrated through her broken ribs. "I don't understand," Yuna whispered. "Why are you helping me?" The cub had no answer. It could not speak, could not explain, could not tell her what instinct or impulse had made it drag a dying alien back to shelter and stand guard over her body. But in that moment, with the creature's warmth seeping through her blankets and its heartbeat pounding against her palm, Yuna understood something important. She was not alone anymore. "Bio," she said softly, testing the word on her tongue. It was Korean for star. It seemed fitting for a creature that had appeared from the darkness when she needed light the most. "I'm gonna call you Bio." The cub made that humming sound again, as if it approved of the name. Outside, the wind continued to howl. The snow continued to fall. And somewhere in the frozen wilderness, the mother Velker had left her cub with a human for reasons that Yuna might never understand. But for the first time since the crash, Yuna felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The first thing Yuna Park felt was pain. It moved through her body like fire, starting from her chest and spreading outward to every bone and muscle. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh red light of emergency beacons flashing above her head. She was hanging upside down. Her safety harness had saved her life, but now it held her suspended in the destroyed cockpit of her survey ship. Outside the cracked viewport, she could see nothing but white. Snow, ice, a frozen world that should have been empty. Yuna reached up with shaking hands and pressed the release button on her harness. She fell hard onto the ceiling of the ship, which had become the floor after the crash. A scream escaped her lips as her ribs shifted in ways they should not move. Something was broken inside her. Several things, probably. She lay there for a long time, breathing in short, painful gasps, trying to remember what had happened. The survey mission. Kepler 442b. The asteroid field that had appeared from nowhere, too fast for the navigation system to avoid. The terrible sound of metal tearing. The screams of her crew. Yuna forced herself to crawl toward the rear compartment where the others had been stationed. Every movement sent new waves of agony through her body, but she kept going. She had to know that the door to the rear compartment was gone, ripped away by the impact. Beyond it, there was nothing. The entire back half of the ship had separated during the crash. Through the jagged opening, she could see a trail of debris stretching across the frozen valley. Pieces of metal and equipment scattered like broken toys. No bodies. No survivors. Just snow and silence. Yuna sat at the edge of the torn metal and let the tears come. Her pilot, Junho. Her engineer, Minji. Her 2 science officers whose names she would never forget. Gone. All of them gone. and she was alone on a planet that the Galactic Union had marked as uninhabitable. A world where no rescue would come because no one was supposed to be here. The cold was already creeping into the ship. Yuna knew she had to move, had to find supplies, had to survive. But the weight of loss pressed down on her chest harder than her broken ribs. She allowed herself 5 minutes to grieve. Then she wiped her eyes and began to work. The next several hours were a blur of pain and determination. Yuna gathered what supplies she could find in the wreckage. Emergency rations for 2 weeks if she was careful. A medical kit with basic supplies. Emergency blankets that would barely hold back the cold. A handheld beacon that flickered weakly when she activated it. Damaged but still broadcasting. Her injuries were worse than she had first thought. When she finally managed to scan herself with the medical device, the results made her stomach turn. 3 cracked ribs. A punctured lung that was slowly filling with fluid. Internal bleeding that the device could not fix. Frostbite already forming on her fingers and toes. She had maybe 3 weeks. Maybe less. Yuna set up a small shelter in what remained of the cockpit, sealing the broken areas as best she could with emergency patches. She wrapped herself in every blanket she could find and sat in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside. On her second night, she heard something else. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her exhausted mind. But then she heard it again. Movement. Something large, walking slowly around the crashed ship. Yuna grabbed her sidearm and pointed it at the viewport, her heart pounding despite the pain in her chest. A shape appeared in the frost-covered glass. Then another. She activated her emergency light and aimed it at the viewport. 6 eyes stared back at her. The creature was massive, easily the size of a tiger from Earth, but its body was different. It had the shape of a wolf, built for hunting and running, but its skin was covered in both scales and fur, silver blue in color, shimmering in the light. Its 6 eyes were arranged in 2 rows of 3, each one reflecting her light like small mirrors. Yuna had seen images of this creature in her database, before it was corrupted by the crash. A Velker, the apex predator of Kepler-442b, the main reason the Union had declared this planet off-limits. They were territorial, aggressive, and intelligent enough to use basic hunting strategies that had killed survey teams before. She should have been dead already. The Velker should have torn through the thin walls of her broken ship like paper. But it just watched her. Then Yuna noticed the smaller shape beside it. Another Velker, much smaller, probably young. A cub. It had the same silver-blue coloring, the same 6 eyes, but there was something different in the way it looked at her. Not hunger. Not aggression. Something else that she could not name. The mother Velker studied Yuna for a long moment. Its eyes moved from her face to the weapon in her hand to the emergency light and back again. There was intelligence in that gaze, a calculating awareness that made Yuna's skin crawl. Then, without warning, the mother turned and walked away. It disappeared into the snow, its massive body swallowed by the white darkness. But the cub did not follow Dot. It sat down in the snow outside her ship, its 6 eyes fixed on the viewport, watching her with an intensity that felt almost human. Yuna waited for it to leave, for its mother to call it back, for something to happen. Nothing did. The cub stayed there through the night. When Yuna woke from her restless sleep, coughing blood and shivering despite the blankets, it was still there, watching, waiting. She did not understand why. Everything she knew about Velker said they were solitary hunters, that they saw anything smaller than themselves as food, that they had no capacity for curiosity or mercy. But the cub sat in the snow like a guardian, like it had been assigned to watch over her, and it showed no signs of leaving. Yuna lowered her weapon and stared back at those 6 strange eyes. "What do you want?" she whispered. The cub tilted its head, almost like it understood the question. Then it settled down into the snow, tucked its scaled tail around its body, and continued to watch. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell. And somewhere in the frozen darkness, a mother predator had left her cub with a dying human for reasons Una could not begin to understand. She had come to this planet expecting to find nothing but ice and emptiness. She had found something else entirely. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Una's life. Her body was failing, slowly but surely, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The fluid in her lung grew worse. Her cough never went away. Some nights, she would wake up gasping for air, convinced that she was drowning in her own blood. But she was not facing it alone anymore. Bile had moved inside the ship completely. The cub had claimed a spot in the corner of the cockpit, close enough to reach Una in seconds, but far enough to give her space. Every night, when the temperature dropped to deadly levels, Bile would curl around her body and share its warmth. The creature's scales held heat in ways that Una's blankets never could. They developed a routine together. In the mornings, Bile would leave the ship to hunt. Una would watch through the viewport as the cub disappeared into the snow, its silver-blue body moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so young. It would be gone for hours sometimes, and during those hours, Una would worry. She would sit by the viewport and watch for any sign of movement, her heart beating faster with each passing minute. Then Bile would return, always with food. The cub brought her small creatures that looked like rabbits but with too many legs. It brought bird-like things with scales instead of feathers. Once, it brought something that looked like a fish, though Una had no idea where it had found water in this frozen wasteland. Bile would drop to kills at Una's feet and sit back, watching with obvious pride as she examined them. The first time it happened, Una had not known what to do. She was not a hunter. She had never prepared raw meat in her life. But hunger was a powerful teacher, and desperation made her brave. She learned to skin the creatures using her utility knife. She learned to cook the meat over her emergency heater, which she had managed to repair using parts from the damaged navigation system. She learned to share her meals with Bile, offering pieces of cooked meat that the cub accepted with gentle movements of its jaws. They ate together every day. It felt important somehow, like a ritual that bound them together. Bile learned things too. The cub learned which sounds meant Una was in pain, and which sounds meant she was just talking. It learned that the coughing was dangerous, that it meant something was wrong inside her body that could not be fixed. Every time Una coughed, Bile would freeze in place, those 6 eyes going wide with something that looked like fear. Then the cub would come to her, always the same way, walking slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. It would press its head against her chest and stay there until the coughing stopped, listening to her heartbeat, making sure she was still alive. Una started talking to Bile during the long hours of darkness. She told the cub about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests that she had not seen in years. She talked about her family back on the colony world where she had grown up, about her mother who had wanted her to become a doctor, and her father who had supported her dream of becoming a pilot. She talked about her crew, about Junho, who had made terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh, about Minji, who had been the smartest person Una had ever met, about the others, whose faces she was already starting to forget. Though she hated herself for BYEOL listened to everything. The cub could not understand the words, but it seemed to understand the emotions behind them. When Una cried, Bile would press closer. When she laughed, the cub would make that humming sound that had become so familiar. One night, during a particularly bad coughing fit, Una felt something break inside her. Not physically, though her body was breaking too. Something else. Something deeper. Why do you care about me? She gasped between coughs, blood staining her lips. You should be out there with your mother. You should be learning to hunt, To survive? To be a real Velker? Why are you wasting your time on a dying human? Bile pressed its head harder against her chest. Those 6 eyes looked up at her, and in them, Una saw something that should not have been there. Something that the scientists and xenobiologists of the Galactic Union would have said was impossible. She saw love, not human love. Not the love of poetry and songs and romantic gestures. Something older. Something simpler. The love of a creature that had chosen to stay when it could have left. The love of a guardian that would not abandon its charge, no matter what logic or instinct said. "You impossible thing," Una whispered, running her fingers through Bile's fur. "You beautiful impossible thing." The Galactic Union had always taught that humans were unique in their capacity for empathy. They formed bonds with other species that no other intelligent race could match. They adopted animals as family. They mourned for strangers. They felt pain when others suffered, even when those others were nothing like them. But here, on a frozen world at the edge of known space, Una was learning that humans were not as unique as they believed. Empathy was not a human trait. It was not something that belonged to any single species. It was something deeper, something fundamental, something that existed wherever life existed. The scientists had simply never looked hard enough to find it, or maybe they had never been willing to look. Maybe it was easier to believe that humans were special, that their capacity for love made them better than the rest of the galaxy. Maybe it was comforting to think that no other creature could feel what they felt. But Bile was proof that they were wrong. A predator's cub, born on a death world, raised to hunt and kill, had looked at a dying human and seen something worth protecting. It had chosen compassion over instinct. It had chosen love over survival. And in doing so, it had saved Una's life in more ways than one. The days continued to pass. Una grew weaker, and Bile grew stronger, but the bond between them only deepened. They had become something new together, something that had no name in any language. They were not human and animal. They were not predator and prey. They were family. And family, Una was learning, could be found in the most impossible places. On day 47, the sky changed. Una was lying in her usual spot, wrapped in blankets with Bile curled against her side, when she heard a sound that did not belong to this frozen world. A deep rumble, growing louder with each second, accompanied by a light that cut through the clouds like a knife. A ship. Someone had found her. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. The past weeks had taken everything from her. She could barely walk now, barely breathe without coughing, barely stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. But she forced herself to move, forced herself to crawl toward the viewport, driven by a hope she had almost forgotten how to feel. The ship was beautiful. A rescue vessel, painted in the white and blue colors of the Galactic Union Medical Corps. It descended slowly through the snow, its landing lights cutting bright paths through the darkness. Bile was awake now, standing at attention, those 6 eyes fixed on the approaching ship. The cub's body was tense, every muscle ready for action. It did not know what the ship was, but it knew that something was coming, and it had positioned itself between Una and the hatch. "It's okay," Una whispered, though she was not sure if she believed it herself. "They're here to help." The ship landed 100 meters from the wreckage. Una could see figures emerging from it, 5 or 6 of them, wearing heavy environment suits and carrying weapons. Standard rescue protocol for hostile worlds. They would approach with caution, secure the area, and then evacuate any survivors. She should have been relieved. She should have been overjoyed. But all she could think about was Bile. The rescue team would see the cub as a threat. They would follow protocol, which meant eliminating any dangerous wildlife before securing the survivor. Bile would not understand why these strange creatures were attacking. The cub would try to protect her, and it would die. No, Yuna would not let that happen. She forced herself to stand, using the wall of the cockpit for support. Every movement was agony, but she pushed through it, driven by a desperation stronger than pain. She had to reach the hatch before the rescue team did. She had to make them understand. The hatch opened from the outside. A face appeared, hidden behind a helmet visor, followed by the barrel of a rifle. The soldier swept the interior of the cockpit and froze when he saw Bile. Hostile detected. The voice was sharp, professional, trained for exactly this situation. All units, we have a Velker in the survivor's location. Moving to eliminate. No. Yuna's voice came out as a scream, or as close to a scream as her damaged lungs could manage. Stand down. She's not a threat. More figures appeared at the hatch. More weapons pointed at Bile. The cub responded exactly as Yuna had feared. It moved in front of her, placing its body between her and the armed soldiers. A low growl building in its chest. Ma'am. Step away from the creature. This voice was different, calmer, commanding. The leader of the team, probably. We're here to rescue you. Let us do our job. Your job is to save me, Yuna said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and emotion. And she saved me first. 47 days. She kept me alive for 47 days. If you kill her, you might as well leave me here, because I won't go without her. Silence. The soldiers exchanged glances, their weapons still trained on Bile. The cub had not moved, had not attacked, had not done anything except protect the human behind it. But they were trained to see danger, not loyalty. They were trained to eliminate threats, not recognize love. The leader stepped forward and removed his helmet. His face was young but tired, with the kind of weariness that came from too many missions and too many losses. His name tag read Lee Do-Yun, in both Korean and Universal Standard. Lieutenant Park, Captain Lee said slowly, that creature is a Class 4 predator. Union regulations require us to neutralize any wildlife that poses a risk to rescue operations. She's not wildlife. Yuna moved forward, putting herself directly in front of Bile. She's family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Such a simple word. Such a powerful one. Captain Lee looked at Yuna, then at Bile, then back at Yuna. The cub had stopped growling. It was watching the exchange with those 6 intelligent eyes, as if it understood that this moment would decide everything. The Union won't allow an unregistered predator on a medical vessel, Captain Lee said finally. His voice had changed. Softer now. Less certain. Then register her. Lieutenant, that's not how it works. There are protocols, procedures, forms that have to be filled out, approvals that have to be obtained. I can't just bring a Velker onto my ship because you ask me to. Yuna looked into his eyes. She saw the conflict there, the struggle between duty and compassion, between regulations and humanity. She had seen that same struggle in herself 47 days ago, when a strange cub had appeared outside her wrecked ship and she had not known whether to fear it or trust it. She had chosen trust. It had saved her life. Captain, she said softly, I'm asking you to do something difficult. I'm asking you to break the rules. I'm asking you to trust me when I tell you that this creature is not what your protocols say she is. But I'm not just asking for myself. I'm asking because if we leave her here, if we kill her or abandon her, we become exactly what the rest of the galaxy thinks we are. Just another species that only cares about its own kind. She paused, gathering what little strength she had left. We're supposed to be better than that. Humans are supposed to be the ones who form bonds, who show compassion, who see the good in creatures that everyone else fears. If we can't do that for Bile, then what's the point of any of it? Captain Lee was silent for a long moment. Then he holstered his sidearm and sighed. Everyone stand down." His voice carried the weight of command, and the soldiers lowered their weapons without question. "Someone get xenobiology on the line. Tell them we're bringing home a +1. The relief hit Una so hard that her legs gave out. She collapsed against Bile, wrapping her arms around the cub's neck, sobbing into its silver-blue fur. The creature made that familiar humming sound, pressing its head against her chest one more time, listening to her heartbeat, making sure she was still alive. "Thank you," Una whispered. She was not sure if she was talking to Captain Lee or to Bile or to the universe itself. It did not matter. They were going home. Both of them. Together. 6 months had passed since the rescue, and Una Park barely recognized herself anymore. Her body had healed. The doctors at the Union Medical Center had worked miracles with her punctured lung and broken ribs. She could breathe without pain now. She could walk, run, even laugh without feeling like her chest was going to collapse. The frostbite had been reversed, her fingers and toes fully restored, but the biggest change was not physical. It was the creature sitting calmly at her side as she walked into the Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Union. BYEOL had grown in the past 6 months. The cub was nearly the size of an earthwolf now, her silver-blue scales gleaming under the chamber's artificial lights, her 6 eyes scanning the assembled council members with calm intelligence. She walked beside Una with the confidence of a creature that belonged there. That had earned her place through loyalty and love. The council chamber was massive, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species across the known galaxy. Today, only the Science Council was present. 12 beings from 12 different worlds gathered to discuss what they called the Park Incident. Councilor Choi Tae-sung spoke first. He was a tall creature with gray scales that rippled when he was agitated, and right now, they were rippling quite a lot. "You expect us to believe," he said, his voice sharp with skepticism, "that an apex predator from a death world formed an emotional bond with a human? That it chose compassion over instinct? That it protected you for nearly 50 days out of what? Kindness?" Una stood at the center of the chamber, Mile pressed against her leg. She had prepared for this moment, had practiced her answers, had readied herself for the disbelief and dismissal she knew would come. "I don't expect you to believe anything, Counselor," she replied. Her voice was calm, steady, confident. "I'm simply telling you what happened. Impossible." Counselor Choi waved one of his 4 arms in dismissal. "Velker are solitary hunters. They do not bond. They do not protect anything except their own offspring. You were prey that somehow survived. Nothing more." Bile's 6 eyes fixed on the counselor. A low rumble vibrated through the chamber, deep and powerful, the sound of a predator asserting its presence. Several council members shifted nervously in their seats. Una smiled. "Does she look like she sees me as prey?" Before Counselor Choi could respond, another figure rose from the human delegation section. Ambassador Han Jian was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Known throughout the Union for her skill in negotiations and her refusal to back down from any challenge. "Perhaps, Counselor," Ambassador Han said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "The issue is not whether the Velker can bond. Perhaps the issue is whether the Union's understanding of life in this galaxy is incomplete." She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Una and Bile. The 3 of them made a strange picture. A human survivor, a human diplomat, and an alien predator that should have been hostile to both. For centuries, the Galactic Union has operated under certain assumptions. That empathy is rare. That cross-species bonding is a human peculiarity. That predators from hostile worlds cannot feel anything beyond hunger and territorial instinct. Ambassador Han paused, letting her words sink in. Lieutenant Park's survival challenges all of those assumptions. One case proves nothing, Counselor Choi said dismissively. One case proves everything, Ambassador Han countered. Because it shows that we have been looking at the galaxy through too narrow a lens. We have been so focused on cataloging dangers and threats that we have forgotten to look for allies and friends. She turned to address the full council, a voice rising with quiet passion. Humans have always formed connections that defy logic. We domesticated wolves 10,000 years ago on Earth, turning predators into partners. We mourn for strangers whose names we never knew. We run into burning buildings to save people we have never met. We love things that cannot love us back, and we keep loving them anyway. Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes. She had not expected this. Had not expected anyone to understand what she had experienced on that frozen world. But Ambassador Han understood. Somehow, she understood perfectly. And apparently, the ambassador continued, gesturing to Bile. When stranded on a frozen death world with no hope of rescue, we can earn the loyalty of a creature that every protocol said should have eaten us. She turned back to Counselor Choi, her gaze steady and unafraid. This is not an anomaly, Counselor. This is what humanity is. We find family in the most impossible places. We build bridges where others see only gaps. We reach out to creatures that snarl and snap and bite, and somehow, against all odds, we make them love us. Ambassador Han's voice hardened, taking on an edge of pride that Yuna had never heard before. And if the galaxy finds that unsettling, if it makes the Union uncomfortable to learn that their careful categories and rigid protocols might be wrong, then perhaps the Union should pay closer attention. The chamber fell silent. Counselor Choi's scales had stopped rippling. The other council members were watching with expressions that ranged from confusion to something that looked almost like respect. Byel chose that moment to press her head against Yuna's chest, just like she had done on that frozen world 47 days of darkness and despair ago, listening to her heartbeat, making sure she was still alive, protecting her from threats that had nothing to do with claws or teeth. Yuna's hand found the familiar warmth of scaled fur. She stroked Byle's head gently, feeling the vibration of that low hum she had come to love so much. Counselors, Ambassador Han said, her voice softening, I am not asking you to change your protocols overnight. I am not asking you to abandon caution or ignore genuine threats. I am simply asking you to consider the possibility that the galaxy is bigger than your categories allow. That empathy is not rare, but simply unrecognized. That the creatures you have dismissed as dangerous might be waiting for someone to offer them a hand instead of a weapon. She smiled, looking at Yuna and Bile with something like affection. Humanity has been reaching out to the unknown since we first looked up at the stars. Sometimes we get burned. Sometimes we get bitten. But sometimes, just sometimes, we find something beautiful. The council voted 3 hours later. The decision was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. By a margin of 8-4, they approved the creation of a new research initiative focused on cross-species bonding and emotional intelligence in non-humanoid life forms. They also officially registered Bio as the first non-human companion species in Galactic Union. History. As Yuna walked out of the council chamber, Bio patting beside her, she felt something she had not felt since before the crash. Hope, not just for herself, but for the galaxy. For all the creatures out there who might be waiting for someone to see them as more than threats. A reporter stopped her at the exit, shoving a recording device in her face. Lieutenant Park, what do you have to say about today's decision? How does it feel to have changed Union policy? Yuna looked down at Bile. The cub looked back at her with those 6 beautiful eyes, and for a moment, she was back on that frozen world, dying and alone, until a strange creature had chosen to save her. I didn't change anything, she said softly. Bile did. She showed us something we should have known all along. And what's that? Una smiled. That love doesn't need language. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't care about species or protocols or what the rules say is possible. She ran her hand along Bile's scales one more time. It just needs someone brave enough to offer it, and someone wise enough to accept it. She walked away before the reporter could ask another question. Bile at her side, two survivors who had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. Behind them, the galaxy was changing, and it was about damn time.